In a bipartisan rebuke of the Trump administration's decision to ease sanctions on Russia, the Senate has voted to proceed on a resolution that would maintain embargoes for 3 Russian companies linked to one of Putin's favorite oligarchs, Oleg Deripaska. However, supporters of the resolution are unlikely to get the 60 votes needed for it to pass in the Senate. Joining us now is Bill Browder, a man who for the last decade has had the attention of Russian President Vladimir Putin for his role in driving the Magnitsky Act, a bill that singled out a number of Putin allies, froze their assets, and denied them U.S. visas. It was also one of the reasons for the infamous Trump Tower meeting in 2016, as Putin has worked to get the Magnitsky Act repealed. Bill, good morning. It's good to see you. A little refresher for our viewers, or an introduction perhaps. In Helsinki last summer, Vladimir Putin brought up your name, effectively unprompted, and said, sure, the Mueller team, the special counsel's office, can come visit and interview our people here in Russia as long as they give us Bill Browder. Why is Vladimir Putin so obsessed with you?
Well, so the Magnitsky Act was passed in 2012, and it bans visas and freezes assets of human rights violators. Vladimir Putin is a major human rights violator who has a lot of assets, and so he personally feels affected by this legislation. He's made it his single largest priority, foreign policy priority, to have it repealed. And since I'm the guy behind it, he's been going after me in every way. And he truly has been, for literally 7 years, has been going after me. They've issued 7 Interpol red notices. There's been extradition requests. There's death threats. There's kidnapping threats. Vladimir Putin is so upset with this because it touches him with his Achilles heel, which is his money in the West.
And his colleagues, right? And
his colleagues, exactly. Well, his colleagues hold his money.
Right.
So what is your take, your general take of what's happening right now? We're talking in the last couple of days about the idea that Donald Trump is discussing openly the idea of withdrawing the United States from NATO after 70 years. We're talking just this morning about Brexit, whether or not Great Britain is going to leave the EU. What's the view from Russia over what's happening in Europe and the United States?
So Putin has got 3 big objectives, and he's not shy about these objectives. He hates NATO, he hates the EU, and he hates a strong United States. And the reason for that is that Russia is really kind of a tiny little country. It's got an economy the size of the state of New York. It's got a military budget 90% less than the United States military budget. And the one thing he hates is when you have these agglomerations of countries that can say, no, Vladimir, you can't do that. And so by weakening the EU with Brexit, by weakening NATO through whatever means he can weaken NATO, and by having the United States in a state of effective intellectual civil war, Vladimir Putin is getting away with a lot of stuff, and he's pretty happy right now.
What do you think the relationship is between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, in the sense that it appears that Donald Trump collapses when he's in Putin's company, that he just collapses and carries on about Putin after he leaves Putin?
Well, I mean, I saw this very personally when in Helsinki, when Vladimir Putin says we want Bill Browder, and he said, I think that's a great idea. and I mean, any aide or advisor or anybody would say that's a stupid idea. It's a terrible idea. It's the worst idea in the world. It took him 4 days to walk that idea of handing me and 11 others over to Vladimir Putin. And why? It's either really dumb, or there's something more sinister going on. I can't say, but what I can say is just, it was, and I can say this personally because it was directed towards me. It was totally and absolutely inappropriate, beyond belief inappropriate, and it shouldn't have happened.
Predicting the future is tricky, obviously, and to use an old Soviet phrase, what do you think the 5-year plan is here? What do you think the world for you will look like in 5 years?
Well, well, from Putin's perspective, he has no 5-year plan. His only objective is to stay in power, keep his money, and stay alive. And in order to do that, as Russia gets poorer, and Russia is getting poorer in a lot of different ways, sanctions, oil prices, all this kind of stuff, Putin's got to make trouble. And the trouble is going to come to us. And it's going to be invasions of foreign countries. It's going to be cyber attacking political process. It's going to be cyber attacking networks, electricity companies, etc. Putin can't face any of the West in a straight up conflict, but he can do all this asymmetric stuff.
So it gets worse before it gets better.
I don't think it gets better. I think it just gets worse.
Stay alive. Internal stuff on Putin. He's afraid internally, someone killing him.
Well, so Putin has got a lot of enemies. I mean, in order to amass a fortune that I estimate to be $200 billion, he's had to kill a lot of people. He's had to take hostage a lot of people. He's seized all of their property, and there's a lot of people after him. And so he's constantly worried about the elite. And then there's the regular people. 1 out of every 4 Russians doesn't have a toilet inside their house. They're so poor. And all these oligarchs are busy on their yachts and their villas and their private jets. And that doesn't make for a stable, secure future for a leader who's taken that stuff away from people.
Can you talk about the overall impact of the Magnitsky Act? And is there anything you do to change it now or amend it?
So the major impact of the Magnitsky Act is it used to be in the old days when you'd sanction a country, you would sanction the country and all the people would suffer. But the elites would bring in their private jets with caviar and champagne. The Magnitsky Act now goes specifically and surgically after the elites, leaving everybody else alone. And the only thing I would change with the Magnitsky Act is I would enforce it liberally and much more broadly. Go after all these bad guys because that's what they hate more than anything else.
For our viewers who don't know, Sergei Magnitsky is your attorney who was tortured to death in a Moscow jail after exposing some of that corruption you're talking about. Bill Browder, we applaud you.
Wow.
You've always been brave. You continue to be brave and being outspoken despite Vladimir Putin having his eye on you. Thanks for being here this morning.
Thank you.
Thank
Mika?
you. And still ahead, we're going to be joined by the Vice Chairman of the Senate Intel Committee, Senator Mark Warner, who says there are still a lot of unanswered questions about Donald Trump and Russia. Plus, much more on the widening impact of the government shutdown on both the economy and national security and people's lives. And with no deal in sight, one Democrat is now tweeting to Ann Coulter, quote, "Please tell the president it's okay to open up the government." And as the president stands firm on his border wall, Mexican officials keep finding drug tunnels beneath the U.S.-Mexico border. MSNBC's Jacob Soboroff takes us inside one of them. Morning Joe, we'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.